We're going to go ahead and get started. The pilots in command of a flight shall, before beginning a flight, shall familiarize themselves with all available information concerning that flight. That's from the AIM. Just going to give you a little bit of history on me. My name is Delia Colvin, and I started at Anchorage Center. I was studying air traffic control in one of the first aviation schools up there, and they got me a job as an assistant at Anchorage Center, and it was a very interesting time to be there because I was a Russian interpreter, and it was right in the time, it was right after Korean Air 007 where the airliner was blown up by the Soviets. And so there were some interesting rules that were in place. A lot of it was non-radar. And we had regularly, we're chasing the MiGs, we're chasing into our space, and we were chasing them back out, testing how far our boundaries on our radar were. So very interesting times, but as soon as we started getting into relations with the Soviets, I became the Russian interpreter for them. So I was giving tours, and sometimes I was on the floor when we would scramble on the Soviets, and I'd have to scramble my guys off the floor. It was a really interesting time to be there. From there, I got picked up as an air traffic controller at Knoxville Tower in Knoxville, Tennessee. It was a beautiful place to be. It was an upstairs, downstairs. So I worked both tower. At the main airport, we invited all the military to come in, so we would have all different kinds. We would have Cessnas in the pattern with C-5s and doing opposite directions. And you want to talk about scary, looking at a little Cessna coming off my runway, and there's a C-5 coming opposite direction. It was pretty exciting. And so we had all these military. We were also the alternate for Delta, so Delta would be in there, and we were working in a large variety of traffic. And I also worked a little dirt strip during our football games. From there, I went into, I'm kind of a weather nerd, and so I went into flight service, and flight service was really doing some exciting things. At that time, we spent 5 months, or it might have been 6 months, with National Weather Service and really got to understand the weather, so that when I went back to Raleigh, North Carolina, I could look at the charts where they plotted the pressure, and I could tell what the weather was going to be. I could look at a chart that they called lifted index and K, and I knew exactly. Now, I'm going to tell you, East Coast and West Coast, very, very different. So then when I transferred out to Hawthorne, thinking I was kind of a hot shot, I realized I knew nothing about California weather. I realized I had a lot to learn. And so I spent the next 10 years of my career in California, going from Southern California up to Northern California, Rancho Murrieta's in Sacramento Valley, and then over to, actually it's missing Oakland. I went over to Oakland, which was really a wonderful place to work. Absolutely loved it. And then got picked up when Lockheed Martin took over in Washington, D.C. FlightWatch is congressionally mandated, and I suspect that as we go down the road, we now, I know when I was working it in D.C., we would work very closely with the air traffic controllers when we had a system, so that a radar controller would turn his jets over to us that were trying to get through a system. We would turn them back over to him, and we would coordinate very, very closely. Then I went into quality assurance, and I was investigating accidents. I was listening to a lot of tapes of recordings of briefings, recordings of in-flight, and putting together pieces of how accidents occurred. So my purpose is to help you understand how to get the best briefing you can, how to understand the weather that's there, and hopefully help you make really good decisions. Now, here's what I do know. You've signed up for this course. You're here on a Saturday afternoon, and that tells me, you're one of those people that takes aviation safety very seriously, and those are the people that live to be very old pilots. So congratulations to you. So here's the statistics. Weather is a major cause of fatal GA accidents and has the highest rate of fatalities, over 80%. And between 1/4 and 1/3 of fatal GA accidents are weather-related. So better understanding of the weather is certainly going to save everyone's life, because a plane that gets lost in weather not only affects the pilot but the passengers and also possibly surrounding aircraft and people on the ground. This is, I threw this in. I love this picture. I hope you're like It's Oakland Flight Service in 1928. They had just moved. They had an offshore building that they were using and they had just moved onto the ground. I can assure you the flight service station where I was working at looked nothing like that. So what are the barriers that keep you from getting a better briefing? Believing you already know the weather, and that is one of the biggest ones I think that comes into play. That in combination with several other points. Got to get their itis. Who was it that said that? Mark. Yeah. Not understanding or misunderstanding the weather provided. I'll just go up and take a peek. Now, if you're flying in a local area and you can pretty much see and you know what that weather is, I don't have any issue with that. It's, you know, when you're going, 50 miles or 100 miles or you're passing a mountain range, then that can be very, very dangerous. The invincible syndrome, and I see that a lot too. So those are the things that I've seen that are the biggest issues, and any combination of those. And I think the more you understand about weather, the less these become an issue. So here's some of the things that you're going to learn today. We're going to talk about what to provide flight service, what you should give them, how to get flight service to answer your questions, how to make the most of your briefings, and some great new tools. I have some other classes that are going to move you more into a self-briefing where you're going to be able to learn how to read the satellite and the radar and the various charts and look for signs that are going to indicate serious weather. We're not doing that here today. Today we're just mostly talking about flight service. Now, why am I talking to flight service instead of just doing a safe briefing? One is because unless you are proficient at analyzing satellite radar and charts and recognizing the adverse conditions before they begin, you'll just need to call flight service. And so the question is why? Because approximately, I went through it, I was trying to calculate, but I would say easily 20% of the briefings I conducted over almost 20 years were missing forecasts for current or developing conditions that I considered hazardous. So I would see the Santa Ana's blowing, knowing that high pressure system was sitting over the Great Basin. I would see that it was crystal clear, and I would know that there was going to be severe turbulence in the Eastern Basin. And yet, until we had urgent pilot reports, those didn't get forecast. I would see the coastal eddy coming up the coast of California, or the fog rolling into the Bay Area. Bay Area, they're a little better at it. They're a little quicker with it. But SoCal, you'd see the coastal eddy starting to form, and yet it was not forecast. And those pilots are going to get stuck out of there. There are so many weather conditions that can come into play, and unless if you're looking at a surface wind and the winds are 180 at 7 to 10 knots and you're not really concerned about that, but then you look at the winds at 3,000 and they're out of the north. So what are you going to have there? You're going to have some nasty turbulence. So those are the things, and being aware of them in advance is what's going to help you be the safest pilot you can. And the best way that I know to do that is to call flight service and let them walk you through a briefing. So when you're calling flight service, you're just going to call 1-800-WEATHER-BRIEF. Now, I do recommend, and who was it? I think it was Mark that was calling flight service. Mark, I hope you have a pilot profile, because when you're calling flight service, if you have a pilot profile, it'll take your phone number and it'll automatically bring up all your data, and you're not having to give it twice. And I like some of the systems that they're using, and that is one of the best, because there's not. Mark says, "You bet I do." That's great. So you're going to press 1 to speak to a briefer. I do not like the voice prompts. I can tell you on the East Coast, the voice prompts did not work well with all the different accents. And they might be set up for California accents, because they seem to work better out here. For SoCal, you press 222 and NorCal 221, but there's usually a 2-digit code associated with the state. So let's say you have a California phone number and you call a briefer, but you want a briefing because you're flying into Idaho, Montana, wherever. You can actually specify, and I would definitely, if you're flying over the Rockies or into the Rockies and you need, hopefully not into the Rockies, but through through the passes, you definitely need to talk to somebody that knows those passes and knows what weather conditions are there. So right now, flight service has gone from, I think it was 240 flight service stations down to 3. And my understanding is that they're going to take it down even further than that. Now, some of those people that were located in those areas are still there, but just make sure that you're talking to somebody from that area, because it is difficult to brief areas that you don't understand. And California weather and the western half of the U.S. really needs somebody that knows the western half of the the western third of the U.S. Tell the briefer what you're looking for. November 1, 2, 3, 4, VFR, need a standard weather brief. So then you're going to give them background information. Now here's what I see a lot of times is that people will try to give the flight service specialist what they think they need, but they don't have the form in front of them. If you don't have the form in front of you, just tell them, and they'll just start prompting you. So you don't need to do any of that. Now, if you have a pilot profile, a lot of the information is just going to come up, but then let them fill in, because otherwise they're tabbing around trying to keep up with you, and I can tell you they're going to get some things done. And here is my #1 recommendation for getting a really great briefing. Take the 5-minute sit down and have your information ready for the briefing. Take it as seriously as you would a pre-flight on your aircraft. And so have the form, know the identifiers, know your Zulu time conversions, and that is the #1 tip that I have for you here. So let them know whether you're VFR or IFR, your full aircraft ID, your aircraft type. Now, a number of years ago, they went from a PA-28 was a Cherokee to P-28 Alpha, and now we've got all different types of Cherokees. So it's completely all right if you don't know what the name is. They are there to help you. But what I would do is make sure that if you don't know it, ask them to look it up, but don't ask them to look it up every time you call, because otherwise they'll start knowing that you're not taking the time to do that. Enough said on that. Departure point, and I can tell you that a lot of times when you're flying to those small airports, a lot of pilots will just give me the one that has the terminal forecast, a larger one, because they want the terminal forecast from there. But what happens is then you're not checking the NOTAMs, and I have seen accidents where NOTAMs did not get passed because that was not what was provided in the briefing. So another point is that when you say I'm departing from Oxnard, that briefer might be from New York and think you mean Oxnard, New York, or they might misunderstand you. So the phonetic alphabet is really the best way to do that. Departure time in Zulu time if you know it. If you don't, let them know and tell them what time zone you're in if they need it. And my one recommendation is not to use military time. When you use military time without using a 24-hour clock, you're going to end up with your flight plans filed for the wrong time and your briefing for the wrong time. Give them the altitudes that you want winds for. Now, if you're looking for winds at 3 and 6, just say that. They'll just give those to you. And if you're actually looking for winds at 45 or 65, they're going to give you 6,000. That's within 500 feet. But 4,500, they will interpolate. They'll blend the winds, if possible, between 3 and 6. Now, occasionally those winds will be opposite directions, so they have rules that they do. I would just give somebody 3 and 6 if they were opposite directions. And route of flight using navigational aids and or airports. And if you have to, I've had a lot of pilots that will start giving me geographical points where they're flying over. And the problem is I have nothing that I can type in when they're giving those to me when I was in flight service. And so if you're flying, for instance, if you're in Los Angeles base and you're flying up Cajon Pass or out Banning, or, you can say those and people know that, but if you were going out Banning, it might be good to give Beaumont as a fix, because you're going to fly right over there. And the destination, as well as the time en route and alternate airports, so that all those things can be checked. So here's the type of pilot briefings, and they say there's 3, I think there's 4 at least. There's standard weather briefing, the abbreviated briefing or update briefing, and outlook briefing, and I also think there's a substandard briefing occasionally, unfortunately. So let's talk about these. Outlook briefing, request an outlook briefing when the proposed time of departure is more than 6 hours away. Now, why 6 hours? How did they come up with that arbitrary that number? Well, that's because almost all forecast material is only valid for 6 hours. So even if something just came out, you got a good chance of it not being valid after that period. So you want to make sure that you get your standard weather briefing within just a couple of hours of your flight. So much can change, and especially if you're calling the night before to get your standard weather briefing or to get an outlook briefing, the next morning you have a very good chance, especially who was it that was flying out of Oakland? You have Michael, you have a very good chance of the weather changing before then. So make sure and get your weather briefing within 2 hours, and I would even call back if there's any iffy weather or any questions. I would call back and just get an update briefing within 30 minutes of your flight or an hour of your flight. Get an abbreviated briefing when you've already had a previous briefing or you've done a self-briefing and you just need a couple of pieces of information. Now, one thing I'm going to recommend you do not do with this, and I see this most often with student pilots over the years, is they were looking to do a cross-country. So what they would do is they would say, what's the condition in Oakland? What's the condition in Sacramento? What's the current in Sacramento? What's the current in Fresno? Well, they're getting those spot weathers, but all around them there's nasty weather. So if you just say you can even call up as a student pilot, if there is any student pilots on here, and say, I'm a student pilot. I'm not ready to get a standard weather briefing yet because I haven't done all my research. But what I'd like is just an abbreviated briefing and give me just kind of the current conditions and what it's looking like. If I use Oakland, Sacramento, and Fresno as my 3 long distance points, how is that going to look? And I'm thinking about leaving at my proposed time of departure is like 1 o'clock, and I'm not looking for a standard because I want to prepare, but just kind of give me a general idea of what's going on with the weather, kind of like an outlook. And they'll just go through and tell you, you know what, that looks like that's going to work very well for you, or that's not going to work very well for you. How about if you use this airport instead? And I was able to recommend other airports often for pilots or across countries that we're going to work. So make sure they have all the information. They'll be able to help you. So important things to know about abbreviating, we've kind of covered this. It does not provide a complete picture of the weather, and it should never be used as a shortcut for a standard weather briefing. And it can save you time, and especially in my aviation weather series, the people are coming out of there and they know how to read the satellite basically. They know how to read the radar, but they know also when there is a question or something that's not adding up, and that is a great time to call flight service for an abbreviated briefing and just say, you know, what's your take on this? Or what are you seeing? It looks to me like there's a chance of this in this area, and have them talk to you about that. And if any of them ever have a problem, I mean, they're most definitely going to want to ask you, do you have the adverse conditions? And you can say, yes, I just looked at the AirMets and the Center Weather Advisory in the last 10 minutes. Is there anything else that's popped up? And then they can take a look at those for you. This picture is there because I'm a weather nerd. Love it. So let's talk about a standard weather briefing. And this is whether you're doing a self-briefing or whether you're doing a standard weather briefing, or I'm sorry, a flight service briefing. This is a format that I would cover. This is all the points that when I'm self-briefing myself, I'm going to look at. And by the way, for some of you that are trying to write notes furiously, I do have a notes page that's going to go out to you at the end of the briefing. I think it goes out automatically. I'll double check on that. If it doesn't, then I'll certainly send you a link. And it doesn't have everything on here, but it has most of it on here. So all of these major points are going to be covered. So for a standard weather briefing, they're going to cover adverse conditions. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. VFR flight not recommended, and synopsis of the weather system. And the flight service specialist can combine those three so that they can come out in any order. What makes the most sense for you? Current weather is summarized, en route forecast, destination forecast, winds aloft, NOTAMs, and then frankly, most of us are going to give you whatever you ask for, so it's kind of funny when I see specific items that you can request. So these are the adverse conditions, and an adverse condition is defined as anything that may alter the flight, the route of flight for a pilot. So AirMet, SIGMET, center weather advisories, which in my opinion, I would really pay attention to those center weather advisories, and I'll tell you why in just a few minutes. Severe weather watches, we don't get many of those in California. Is everybody here from California, or do we have some people from other states? I'll keep talking and I'll keep watching. Urgent pilot reports, TFRs, and runway. Oh, we got somebody from Nevada here. Thanks, Senator. And TFRs and runway or NOTAM closures. Oregon, Washington, California. Great, Mark. Hi, Jerry. Oh, you're in Texas. Wow. Well, great. So I'll include some more that's a little more central. Washington and Arizona for Stephen. That's what my dad does. Goes between Washington and Arizona, Seattle area, Bellevue. All right. So we've got all of these adverse conditions, and let's talk a little more about so a runway or airport closure. There's a little airport up north, and there's only one way you can land or depart in it, and they NOTAMed it. And I'm going to talk about this just a little bit. So NOTAMs, if they are, once they are published on a chart or in the NOTAM book, they no longer appear. We don't brief those you on those. So those are Class 2 NOTAMs once they're published. So we don't. Those do not come out in a briefing. Those you have to check in the NOTAM book, and you also have to check. But I know that there was an issue with this one runway that you can only land or take off in the same direction. And I don't know why that was ever NOTAMs, because it was due to a mountain, but there you go. It's great to see so much diversity here. Let's see, Jerry, you must have been a pilot in California at one time to get on this list, I think. Where are you at in Texas, by the way? All right, we're going to go on. Well, hopefully. So AirMet Sierra, oh, San Angelo. Oh, I was in San Angelo when I was in the Army. Nice place. AirMet Sierra for IFR or mountain obscuration. So the requirement for issuance is ceilings less than 1,000 feet or visibilities less than 3 miles, affecting over 50% of the area at one time, or extensive mountain obscuration. Oh, by the way, I got a little poll for you before we get further into this. Hang on a second here. I'm going to pop up this poll. And what do you consider the worst of the hazards? I seen, and for Jerry, for you in Texas, it's going to be a little different than I would consider out here. You don't have many mountains out in Texas. Oh, look at you guys. You guys are good. Okay. I've got a couple of you still there, still thinking on it. All right, and we got 53% said icing, 18% said turbulence, and 29% said mountain obscuration. And my vote is mountain obscuration. And let me tell you why. Hang on a second here. Can y'all see my screen again? There's Mark. Oh, Mark says Zulu, Tango, and Sierra here. I agree with that, and all of them have the potential to be deathly. All of them do. My thinking is mountain obscuration, and let me tell you why. Because that is the air met that when I tell a pilot there's mountain obscuration and he's VFR only, I will tell you about 70% of the time the pilot blows off the air met. And it's one of the few ones I've had is, did you understand? Let's talk about, what mountain obscuration means. Yeah, I understand it. Now, my guess is, since you're on this call, you're not one of those guys that does that. Or you understand when somebody's giving you an adverse condition, you really understand that. But that's what typically happened when I used to give mountain obscuration. So and let me finish showing this, and then we'll come back and talk about mountain obscuration. So to issue an air met, actually I'm going to back up just a second here. In eastern Kentucky, I was in D.C., and I would say the eastern 1/3 of Kentucky was covered in low IFR. Ceilings less than 500, visibility is less than a mile. And it was, as I said, very widespread. And what happened is that there was no air met. And so we called the National Weather Service and asked them what was going on with that. And they said, this little point right here, widespread means applicable area covers at least 3,000 square miles. And evidently, we were just shy of that. We were 2,950. And so it did not count as an air met, and yet it was extremely hazardous, and it was extremely widespread. So what they did is, there is a National Weather Service guy that is in the Air Route Traffic Control Center. His job, or her job, is to keep track of actual conditions that are forming, and they can jump in there for their airspace and issue a center weather advisory for any kind of system that is not being widely broadcast, to let pilots know when there's something that's a hazard right away. They're here and now. So when you see a center weather advisory, pay particular attention to those. Those will come out before convective SIGMETs come out. They will come out when there are conditions, urgent pilot reports are being reported, and they get those out there. Those are one of the top things that I would make sure that you're watching for. And or it has to cover at least 50% of the area. So back to the mountain obscuration. So here we've got mountain obscuration covering Washington, Idaho, western Montana through Idaho, and northern California. So that looks like a cold front to me. In Washington, you can just bet there you just know you're going to have mountain obscuration, let's see, except for 1 month out of the year. But other than that, you're probably going to have that. In California, we see it so rarely that I think that in Southern California in particular, that it's just not expected. And in Texas, I don't think you have any mountains there, do you? There is some mountains in Arizona, though. Jerry says, nope. I see you were an Alaskan bush pilot. I knew a lot of bush pilots for many years. All right. So we were talking about AirMet Sierra. An AirMet Sierra would have been issued for here. This white, smooth, fairly smooth edge, you can see it's kind of moving along the edges of what would be mountains. You can tell that's fog. So this is Monterey Bay, and you can see fog, and it's actually spilled in through the mountains. This, where we see there's some shadowing there on the satellite, The shadowing there indicates cumulus. So this is a visible picture, and the reason I know that is that the ground is dark. That means it's hot. And anything that's shadowed is probably got some vertical development or convective activity. So you see a little bit of shadowing here. This looks to me like a coastal eddy circulation. So, and Jerry, coastal eddies are, we get some unusual weather in California, and one of them is coastal eddy circulation that builds up clouds along the coast. I know they say in California we don't ever get any clouds, but we do. We do get some clouds, and we do get some precipitation too. Not a whole lot, not the same as Texas. I do like that Texas weather. It's kind of exciting stuff. I would have been a weather chaser if I had not been a single mom. Airmet Tango. So light to moderate turbulence or sustained surface winds of 30 plus knots. Now here's the thing to watch about turbulence. We've got this yellow, and that means low altitude, and the green means what? By the way, this looks like a jet stream to me. That's kind of key. You probably all know this green is high altitude, right? But here's the thing with this. Evidently, the green will actually be, just means that it's not surface-based. So I have seen the green start at 3,000 or 4,000 feet. So just keep an eye out on that, and even if you're flying low altitude, just double check and make sure those altitudes are high altitude. Some cool weather pictures. It's a standing lenticular from a mountain wave. Santa Ana is in the Eastern Basin, or Texas anytime. Outflow UFO cloud. Yeah, that's right. Mark says. All right, so icing. Icing occurs when we have visible moisture in the forms of clouds or rain, and it's below the freezing level. Now I think, and I'm going to have to double check on this because I haven't done icing in quite some time, but I think it's 10 degrees below freezing, and you start not having so much of an issue. But please don't quote me on that. I'm going to look, and I'll get my figures together. Somebody on here probably knows what it is. As a matter of fact, my guess is Jerry remembers from flying up in Alaska, although the pilots in Washington, I'm sure, remember that too. But so you want visible precipitation, and you want to look for freezing level or below, and actually you could get it even above that because you've got some speed going in. If the aircraft is a little colder, you could see some icing. So I'm, as I said at the beginning of the class, one of the things that I saw oftentimes were situations that either showed visible moisture and temperatures below the freezing level, so Airmet Zulu would have been an issue and it was not forecast, or I saw Santa Ana's and no Airmet for turbulence, or and they're not going to issue a SIGNET until they actually are getting reports of that, or center weather advisories, and IFR forming, or situations that easily the dew point spreads 1 degree and we only have 3 knots of wind. We're going to have some fog in the morning. So, and speaking of which, I want y'all to just take this, I don't have a written poll, but when is the most likely time of getting fog, and why? Most likely time of day. What is the most likely time of day to get fog? I'm sure you know this instinctively. Early morning, Mark says. Yep. Yep, that's right. And it's the hour after the sun rises. The temperature will drop 1 more degree down. Morning, Michael says. Yep. Michael's up in Oakland. He knows that too. And it will take 1 more dip 1 hour after the sun rises, and that's when you'll see that fog forming. So 1 hour after the sun rises. So you look, and it's 7 o'clock in the winter, 6 o'clock in the summer, and you've still got a chance of that fog forming. If your dew point spreads 1 degree, it's going to drop, and you're going to see some fog probably if there's not a wind of 5 knots or more. Confluence of waterways, microclimates. Yeah, you do. That's completely, yep. And some icing. So let's talk about TFRs. TFRs, the only official source for TFR information is Flight Service. However, there is a website, and that's actually where Flight Service gets their information from. So here is the website. It's an FAA website, www.tfr.faa.gov. Now, when you're calling for your briefing, how many of you have ever, let's see a show of hands, how many of you have ever called Flight Service where we're having fires and lots of TFRs and they're reading out to you either lat longs or degree distance fixes, and you have no idea, and they're reading these off, and maybe there's 3 or 4 TFRs that are going to affect you. Anybody ever have that? Yep, I'm seeing some hands going up. And they read to you this long list. I've read this long list, and it's a requirement for me to do it. However, here's a better idea for you. Get the number of the TFRs that they're telling you are going to affect you. So write down the numbers and tell them that you're going to look them up and chart them, and then do that. So what you'll do is you'll go to the site, www.tfr.faa.gov. You'll take that number. Now there's one is a list and one is a map. So you can just take a general glance at the map and say, oh, this one is not going to affect me, this one is going to affect me. But then go over to the list and look up the specific ones that Flight Service told you might affect you. And when you've got that list, you can plot it out yourself and make your own decisions. And it's much easier than having somebody trying to read degree distance radios. I mean, it's just... So that's my recommendation on that. Also, if you are flying someplace, and Mark says verify the polygons on Preflight. Oh, yeah, Preflight, that's right. Preflight actually has some great tools on that as well. And as long as you're still receiving your signal, then you're in good shape. Mark, have you had any problems with losing your signal on Preflight while you're flying? I've heard a couple of pilots mention that, and I don't know if it was just their concern or... you haven't had that around there. Okay, good. So, let's see, and Mark, where are you at? You're in... All right, so if you're in Los Angeles Basin, oh, you're in Eastern Washington, yeah. So if you are in the Los Angeles Basin, in the Seattle area, around Dallas, any place where you've got a lot of football games, and in Texas, high school football games have 10,000 seats. So you've got to know where those stadiums are, and you need to stay away from them because there's not going to be a listed or a posted TFR if there is more than 10,000 people there. You're just going to need to know that you can't be there. So I would be talking to approach control or center and make sure that they keep you out of trouble there, especially if you're in a high density area or in Texas. So, because of the football stadiums. Let's talk about VFR flight not recommended. That is a statement that came about, it seems like it was about 15 years ago. It might have been longer now. And when it first came out, most of the flight service specialists were really up in arms about that because we felt that we were usurping the decision-making of the pilot. And it was very offensive to most of us. And I know that a lot of times pilots, when we tell them VFR flight not recommended, they feel that we're giving them a statement of what they can or cannot do. And it's oftentimes quite upsetting to them. So let's talk about what that statement is. VFR flight, when VFR flight is proposed and sky conditions or visibilities are present or forecast, surface or aloft, then in the briefer's judgment would make flight under VFR doubtful. The briefer will describe the conditions and then tell the pilot why they're saying that and when it should end. It's a recommendation, it's advisory in nature, and the final decision is always rests solely with the pilot in command. So I will tell you that I am hesitant. If I'm talking to a student pilot, it's going to be far different than when I'm talking to somebody that's an experienced pilot that knows the weather and knows what to watch for, and I can hear it in your voice when you're somebody that has been around the block a time or two. I certainly know that. I actually brief checked Jaeger several times, and I could tell you before he even gave me his name, I knew he got what I was saying. So VFR flight is proposed and surface or visibility is present. So I'm going to tell you, in the Sacramento Valley, we get a thing called Thule fog. If I'm talking to a pilot and he does not appear to be a student pilot and he's going from Oakland to South Lake Tahoe, he's going to be topping out that low-level Thule fog. And I'm going to mention the Thule fog. I'm going to tell him they're going to be topping it out, but I am not going to tell him VFR flight not recommended. On the other hand, if there is any possibility that a student pilot is going to be running into it, I'm definitely going to be saying that. So here's my recommendation to you. When there are some specialists that will use the VNR statement as a CYA, and yeah, Michael says, I got a weird VFR flight not recommended with perfect weather going to Avalon Airport. It was well above the LA Stratus. Yeah, you were topping out the Stratus, and so they were saying that it was kind of they wanted you to know that there was going to be fog that you were going to be topping out. So that was why they probably gave it to you. I wouldn't have given it to you, but I would certainly have made sure that you knew you were going to be topping it out. But here's the thing, is that when somebody gives that to you, the next thing, your next line should be, let's see, my departure and destination are clear. Your forecast that you gave me are clear. Why are you, is there, excuse me, I had to sneeze there. What is it specifically? Am I actually going to run into IFR conditions, or are you doubtful that I'm actually going to land in VFR conditions? And challenge that and have them, because there may be something that they failed to say or failed to communicate that could make a change in what you're thinking. I can tell you there have been times when I've given a current and forecast for VFR conditions and yet said VNR, but then I follow it up with the reason I'm giving you a VFR flight not recommended is because it looks to me like this frontal system that was supposed to go stationary is not stationary and is going to push southward. It looks like it's moving fast enough that it looks like it has a very good chance of affecting your route. So in my humble opinion, VFR flight is not, is very doubtful. So that's when I use it. That's how I use it. And if you have the knowledge to be able to kind of listen to what they're saying and take it in, but challenge it, especially on that, make sure that you're finding out why they're saying that, because there may be something you didn't see. And, oh, Mark says because of mountain obscuration around here. If they're saying VNR because of mountain obscuration, I would VNR with mountain obscuration, unless you were able to top out those ridges. I would definitely do that, yeah. Mountain obscuration is one of my top ones for saying that. But Mark, if you're flying in eastern Washington and you're not going to be passing any mountains, then it is really awkward to be saying VFR flight not recommended due to mountain obscuration, and you're not flying through any mountains. And I have heard that, or shooting through a gorge, yeah. All right, so let's talk about current conditions, METARs and PIREPs. So the next thing they're going to give you is a combination of all the weather. Now, typically we have flight service specialists will give you a full METAR in the beginning for the departure point and destination, and then summarize the rest. Sometimes they'll do it in separate blocks because it's simpler. They'll take a look at the satellite, they'll take a look at the radars, pilot reports what's going on, and then they're supposed to summarize that all for you. As we get more and more weather information, it becomes easier. Back in the olden days, it seems like it was kind of tough. You have a lot of holes in the weather where you weren't quite sure, and the satellite was our best friend. And I just want to point out these categories. Are you all pretty well familiar with the categories? Because you can look at the weather depiction charts, and especially, let's see, the guys in Washington and Texas and outside of California, those are very, very valuable. In California, it doesn't seem, I mean, most of the time it's either showing VFR or IFR, it seems like. En route forecasts. This is one of the most valuable tools in briefing, and yet it is the most, I mean, it is the best tool that you have for an en route forecast, but it also has the most opportunity to be misunderstood. There's several things you need to understand about en route forecasts, and one of them is that the weather is in MSL. The layers are in MSL. So they come out for large areas. San Francisco has all these states. Salt Lake has all of these. Chicago, Boston, Miami, Dallas. It's a very general picture of the weather, but it'll give you approximately what layers are at the bases. But there's some things that you need to know, and one is that it's not going to forecast layers that are IFR. So it's an MSL layer, and yet it won't, if the layer is going to go below 1,000 AGL, it will not forecast it. If the visibility is going to drop below 3, it will not forecast it. Also, it doesn't talk about visibility unless it's restricted to 3 to 5. So, how do you know what's going on with this? And by the way, I have a little video that I put together that's deciphering the area forecast, and it will go into depth explaining a lot of the peculiarities to it. But we actually spend, I think, about 30 minutes of the second session of our aviation weather series on this because it's so vital. So the area forecast is an aviation weather forecast. It's covering several states. Cloud heights are in MSL, mean sea level, unless otherwise stated, and it'll state it in the terms of AGL or CIG, but almost always. I think in Texas you'll see it AGL and ceiling more often than you will other places, seems like, where you don't have the mountains. No surface winds are forecast unless 25 knots or greater, and no IFR conditions. Those are covered under AirMet Sierra. So you must check the AirMet for IFR in order to be able to take this. So it can be, say, an AGL later at 1,500 and visibility 5 miles, but you still need to check because there may be another layer below that. Mark says that Preflight will do that for you. I've heard wonderful things about it. So let's talk about this. I saw a post on one of the aviation sites, and they were saying, well, what reports are in AGL? So first off, METARs are always above ground level. TAFs are always terminal area forecast, or aerodrome forecast, are always in AGL. And AirMet Sierra for IFR is always in AGL. Mountain obscuration, not the same thing. But AirMet Sierra is above ground level. The rest of the AirMets are all going to be MSL. And think about it, because it does make sense. You've got an AirMet for turbulence below 10,000. Well, it's not going to change. The 10,000 feet is not going to jump up and down based on where the mountains are. It's going to be consistent at 10,000 feet, unless it's going through the Rockies, and then it's going to be changing quite a bit. Most pilot reports are going to be in MSL and the area forecast. Now, by the way, the area forecast is my favorite tool for looking at potential mountain obscuration and also for getting TOPS reports. Well, pilot reports if I can get them for TOPS. So here's the important things to know. It does not forecast layers below 1,000 or visibilities below 3. It's a great product for getting tops and determining mountain obscuration. So if you see a layer at 5,000 feet or I can't think of what some of the passes are. Let's say 1,200 feet in the Los Angeles basin, and you're trying to get out one of the passes. That's going to be pretty skinny to get out. If you're up in the Bay Area and you're in the Sacramento Valley looking to get into the Bay Area and going by way of Livermore, and those layers are in the Bay Area are showing at 1,000 overcast, you're not going to be able to get in there very, very easily. Oh, CIG is ceiling, so that is the layer from the surface elevation up to the base, and it is a broken or overcast layer, which means you don't have a very good chance of getting out of it. And I don't have the definitions for broken or overcast here, but that you don't have a great chance. I think broken is more than 50% coverage, so somebody here probably knows. An en route forecast is used for a destination forecast if a TAF is more than 5 miles away. Now, when you're getting your briefing and you know that the weather is typically the same at two places, I would definitely ask for that TAF. If you're 7 miles away and you want a TAF from another airport, definitely ask for it. And they may just offer it up. I oftentimes did. But be careful when they give that to you when they say the en route forecast is your destination forecast, or this is your en route forecast, and they give it to you in terms of that, then just remember that, oh, I see, I just saw, Michael, you're looking at this. So AGL is above ground level, CIG is ceiling. And that's how they write it in the area forecast, by the way. So just be sure that you understand that that forecast is in MSL, and so you've got to subtract your airport elevation from it. And if there's an AirMet for IFR, the layers are actually forecast lower than that. There's another thing I want to point out on the area forecast, and that is that it divides it up. Like here we've got on the left Northern California, coastal sections, Sacramento Valley, Shasta, Siskiyou, and especially in Texas I've found this, that these areas that they divide the lines are very obscure. So here it's pretty clear cut. Santa Rosa to Sacramento to South Lake Tahoe, but it might say the southwestern mountains or the northeastern valleys, and you don't always know where that is. So there's a chart that I'm going to show you, and you have to look at that. And I can't tell you how many times I thought I was giving the correct forecast and then looked at this chart and realized I'd given a completely wrong area, and even some places that I was familiar with. So be sure that you are checking this chart when you're looking at, when they're defining areas. It's not always where you think it is. It's not always I can't think of the word for it, but it's not always obvious. Here's another thing with the area forecasts. So here it's calling for 2,500 scattered, 3,000 overcast. Now remember, these are MSL, which along the coastal sections is probably going to be pretty much the same. But then it's got all these various, that's occasional, light rain. But there's a couple of these in here I was going to show you. Like BR is for mist, and there's PCPN. You can probably figure that out. But here's what I would do. There is a link on the site that has to abbreviations, or I may just have a chart of abbreviations. I may just have posted that. I can't remember. And you can look those up. So make sure that you clear up any misunderstandings that you have there. And I'm talking a little more than usual, so I'm going to speed this up just a little bit. So here's the chart. You can see it's got various areas, and Texas is one of the ones that I always have to look at. So make sure that you use this. This will define where they're calling the Shasta Siskiyou and the southwestern mountains and all of that. Terminal forecast is issued 3 times a day. For me, those are one of the best forecast products if you've got one within 5 miles, because those guys know that weather there, and they have written that weather every day for usually 10 years or more, and they know it. They know it very well, and and sometimes things slip by them, but very rarely. They're usually right on top of it. And so I do like the terminal area forecasts. Let's talk about winds aloft. So there's now they use FBs, Foxtrot Bravos, and it'll tell you when it's valid. And it says for use 20 Zulu to 03 Zulu. And then it has winds at 3,000, 6,000, 9,000 on up. This is the East Coast, by the way. One of the things I always check is the surface winds, and then look at the winds at 3,000. On this, it's the first 3 digits are direction, so it's coming from 180 and at 27 knots. Now, if you've got winds coming out of the north or light and variable at the surface, you're going to run into some turbulence there. Severe turbulence, probably. Another adverse condition is if you're heading into the wind, because you can see with these winds, if you're flying into those, you're going to be stopping for gas long before you guessed. But if you were smart, you wouldn't be flying on a day like today. Because look at these winds, 180 at 27 at 3,000, up at 6,000, 240 at 41. And then you go to Bangor and it's changing, 60 degrees here. You've got some serious weather going on. Of course, that's up where they get weather, so up in the Northeast. Wyoming windsock. And I think that's in front of the flight service station there, and I can confirm, having been stuck in Wyoming based on a very cold wind, that this is probably pretty accurate. All right, so this is 1-800-weatherbrief.com. It's a new site that Lockheed's put up. Despite everything, I am not a Lockheed Martin employee, and I have no particular allegiance to them other than they were very good to me while I worked for them. But I am very impressed with what they're doing with their online products. And this is a page where you can actually set your flight plans in there, and you can have your proposed flights, scheduled flights, and it'll bring up weather. I would recommend that you're learning how to read these charts and what's going on with them. If you were having any issues with what I was talking about on the satellite, I would make sure that you're taking I may put up a video just on a brief thing on satellite, but the aviation weather course, that series that I have, it's a 2-session course, and that really covers that in depth, as well as how to read these charts and what their significance is. I have one starting tomorrow, as a matter of fact. I only do them a couple of times a month. And the one thing that I really like on it, this is the active page on it. You can file easy activate and easy close or flight plan close reminders. I used to fly up in Alaska occasionally, and I hate to admit it, but every time I landed my plane, I was thinking about tying it down. I was not thinking about closing my flight plan, and I got in trouble a lot of times. Of course, back then we didn't have cell phones to remind us, so they were trying to chase me down, and usually just went out and found the plane. Except for the time I caught it on fire and it was in the hangar, but so I overprimed it. So easy activate, easy close, flight plan close reminders. I just think it's a wonderful service. Have a couple of classes coming up. I'm mastering pre-flight and in-flight briefings, and it's going to give you some of the basics of some of the weather. We've had California weather, but we're getting a lot of people from all over the country now, so I'll probably expand that and go into more detail. West Coast weather, western third of the U.S. is a little different, so I may separate those out. We'll see what we do with that. And the aviation weather seminar, I was doing those for $99 a piece. And I keep the classes small. We have a lot of interaction. As a matter of fact, most of the comments that I've had lately have been how much they appreciated being able to stop and ask specific questions. So when people have questions, we really delve into it and make sure that there's an understanding and go back over slides until, but you will come out of that with a very good understanding of what the charts are for, what the satellites say, what radar is showing, and really a good ability to do a safe briefing, and mostly knowing when you need to call flight service to get the gaps filled in. And that I am doing for $69. I have one starting tomorrow. It goes in 2 sessions. We do an hour and a half, sometimes goes to 2 hours. If it goes to 2 hours, we'll probably do a little break in between. And then usually they send me questions in between and we kind of fill those in on the second session. So one's starting tomorrow. It's results of icing. Again, California weather with a lot of fog. System right over here. You can see the shadows on the cumulus. Shadows on the cumulus. And tule fog, which we get in the Central Valley in the wintertime. And sorry for those of you up in Washington, Oregon, and Texas. I will include more pictures next time so that we have more of that. But here you can see the patterns of the snow. So that's a wintertime picture, obviously. Also, tule fog is we only get in the wintertime. It's from an inversion after we had a rain. And a Catalina eddy. Right along I-5, yes, it is. And 99, I think there's more crashes, more fatal crashes on 99 from the tule fog than any place else in the country. And mountain wave, we're going to talk about that some. Jerry won't have to worry about that. Another great weather picture. That probably is Texas. Now, for those of you in the Bay Area or that fly up to the Bay Area, this is my very favorite product. It's a little touchy. If you have any problems, send me an email and I'll help walk you through it. But this is the link, and it's a Navy site. When you get there, you're going to select Eastern Pacific and West Coast, Monterey Bay, Latest, and Animate, and Visible. And there's notes for this, I think, on the notes. I'm pretty sure it is. And then you're going to click Most Recent when it goes to the next screen. And that will give you at nighttime, so 4 or 5, 6 in the morning before you're getting a good visible, you're going to be able to see what's happening with that fog in the Bay Area. Again, I have notes on that. If you have any questions, send me an email. Here's some great products and some great websites. I did include mine. I hope that's all right with y'all. And I've got those on the notes as well. These are some of the things that we cover in the some of the other in the aviation weather series, but we also, I think the aviation weather series is more central and is more along the lines of what's going on across the country. So here's my 10 top tips. First one is have an idea of what you may encounter prior to the briefing. So do a little bit of a self-briefing. Give the briefer what he needs and then ask for what you need. If you don't have a flight plan form, let the briefer prompt you. And what my recommendation is that you sit down, take 5 to 10 minutes to sit down, take notes, be attentive. The biggest thing that I've seen is people, especially like around holidays, they're loading up the kids, they're loading up the plane, and they are not paying attention to their weather. You're the ones that are here, so you're taking it seriously. I know you are. Ask questions if you don't understand what the briefer says. I appreciate Michael asking what CIG was and some of the other questions I've had here. If the briefer is going too fast, tell them they work for you. Let the briefer know that you are a student pilot, or if you are a student pilot. Don't just tell them that arbitrarily. And otherwise they'll be going too slow for most of you. Log into 1-800-weatherbrief.com to get updates on adverse weather. Get a briefing within 2 hours of your flight time and an update within 30, and educate yourself on aviation weather.